Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Illinois Learn to Hunt presents Turkey Hunting 101. We will be having 102. I'll be mentioning this again later on, but we have Turkey Hunting 102 on Thursday if you haven't seen that in our schedule yet, but it's going to complement this one very well. So if you're interested in turkey hunting in the spring, I highly suggest you guys sign up for both. There we go. All right. So some quick webinar reminders. Some people who have taken some webinars from us before are going to know these already, but for any newcomers we have. So your microphones and your webcams are disabled, so you don't have to worry about being asked any questions or anything like that. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation as we work through it. If you have any questions at all, you can put that in the Q&A window, and either the pardon me, either the presenter will answer it or we'll answer it in the chat. So in that window, we'll answer it, and you can keep track of all the questions that are asked through that window. We also have a chat window that you can use to talk to each other or to us. So feel free to interact with each other. It kind of makes it more fun that way. And also at the end, we will have time for any questions that we may not have addressed, or if you think of something along the way, you can ask us at the end. So a reminder that you will receive an email in the coming days with a copy of this PowerPoint and a link to a recording of this webinar. We may also have some informative handouts that we send out depending on the webinar that we have. So look forward to those. We'll also have a survey that only takes a couple minutes to fill out, and so please fill that out. Even if you fill the survey out already, if it's a different webinar, you can click a different webinar in the survey and say which webinar you attended, and that allows us to know what you liked and didn't like about this webinar. And it also allows us to know and tell the DNR if what's holding everybody back from hunting some more. So there's some survey questions in there that kind of critique hunting in Illinois and lets us know what we can tell the Illinois DNR, how they can improve. So we don't work directly under the DNR, but we do have communication with them. So whatever you can tell us, we can help and lobby for our citizens here. So our presenters tonight, we have Dan with us. Dan, you want to say hi so everybody knows what you sound like?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. It looks like we have a ton of people in here, so this is a great crowd, and thank you all for coming out on a nice Tuesday evening, and we appreciate it, and we hope you take something away that can better your chances of success during the turkey season.
Perfect. And then we got Adam there with a bird he got a couple years ago. Adam, you want to say hi?
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining us, and hope you guys enjoy our webinar tonight.
Welcome. And I'm Jason Buckley. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate everybody being out here tonight. Along with us is Curtis. Curtis, would like to say hi.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
I'm going to pause real quick. And Jason, it sounds like your audio is a little bit lower than myself, Adam, and Curtis's. So maybe see if you can address that. And if not, I'll continue on forward. So if you just want to advance the slide. So today we're going to cover Turkey 101, and obviously this is kind of a two-part webinar series upcoming on Thursday. We have a Turkey 102, and so tonight we're really going to build on the concept of wild turkey ecology, but also dive into hunting regulations, land access. We'll go over turkey vocalization, so we're not going to go into a specific calling demo tonight. That will be on Thursday, but today we're going to go over an overview of the vocalizations that you're likely to hear from turkeys, and also how they utilize these vocalizations to communicate with each other. And that's a very important step as a turkey hunter, is being able to understand when and when not to use different vocalizations. And so that's what we're going to touch on there. We're also going to dive into a little bit of scouting techniques information. Scouting is one of the things that every hunter can do to increase your chances of success. And so we'll go over a few different strategies for scouting, mainly utilizing locator calls and how to identify potential roosting trees and all these. And then we'll kind of wrap up with a conversation about decoy strategies. And then a quick mention on turkey calling, but then we're really going to save that for Thursday. And so that'll kind of wrap us up today. And then on Thursday, we're going to do a quick review of some of the turkey ecology. And then we're going to do some turkey calling demonstrations and some more kind of scenario-based slides, I guess is the best way to say it. So we're going to present a scenario and kind of go over how we would choose up and how we would how we would go about hunting a specific scenario. Another few things we're going to talk about is locating mid-morning toms. So a lot of people obviously hunt directly off the roost, but mid-morning can be extremely effective. And we'll go over some strategies for that. And then if you end up having a turkey tag that's in the latter portion of the season, so maybe a third, fourth, or even fifth week season, oftentimes you might have to deal with henned up turkeys. And so we'll go over some strategies on how to address that and how to be able to pull that tom away from a live hen, because that can certainly be a little bit challenging. And so that's kind of a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today and as well as Thursday. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and he's going to dive right in, give us a quick conversation about how hunting is kind of related to conservation. Then he's going to dive right into an overview of turkey ecology. So take it away, Curtis.
All right. Thanks, Dan and Jason. So as Dan alluded to, we like to start off talking about how hunters are conservationists. So here in North America, our model for wildlife conservation is kind of built on the back of hunters. So it's completely funded by hunters. A lot of people think that wildlife management and conservation might be one of those things that's covered under general tax dollars, but such is not the case. But what we do have is we have a series of license stamps and permits that we buy to go hunting. Those monies are directly turned around by state agencies and put back into wildlife management and conservation efforts. But then we also have the Pittman-Robertson Act, which was enacted back in 1937 by conservationists. And basically, this is a 10 to 11% excise tax that happens on the manufacturer level on sporting equipment, guns, ammunition. So this is not a tax that you see. Like if you go to Cabela's to buy a box of ammo, there's not going to be an added 10 to 11% tax on that at that time. That's already occurred. But basically that money is all earmarked to go, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service allocates that back to the states. And that money goes directly back to wildlife management and conservation efforts as well. And this slide is particularly important with wild turkeys because a lot of people think of wild turkeys as one of the greatest conservation success stories in North America. And that's saying a lot because we've got a lot of good ones, but turkey definitely is up near the top. So with that, we'll jump right into the ecology. Turkeys are really cool birds. First, we're going to talk about a little bit of specialized lingo. If you're kind of just getting started, some of these things might be news to you. So a beard. So a turkey is a bird. What the heck is it doing with a hairy protrusion from its chest? Well, a beard does look like hairs, but these are actually modified feathers. And a really interesting part of a turkey basically only has a function in mate selection, really nothing else, but pretty neat component of turkeys. We also got spurs. So a lot of the upland game birds do have spurs. These are actually functional. The males, these develop much more. The females just kind of have little bumps where the spurs should be, but the males use these in fighting. They continue to grow throughout life, and that will help the mature tom to defend their territories and to fend off any younger toms. Fan is when the tom or the male turkey is trying to impress and attract mates. He can fan out his feathers, making a really pretty fan, and that sort of allows the hen to clue in on which males are the fittest and might make the best mates. So a tom, I've already used this a little bit, but this is a male turkey, generally a mature male. A jake is what we're going to call an immature male. So before they've got a beard, like in this picture here on the far left, you see turkey running, he's got a beard hanging down, real easy to see. The picture right next to him with the beard kind of standing straight out, that's what a jake is going to look like. So Beard's not quite swinging down yet. Still a male turkey, still legal game, but that is what we would call a Jake. And then of course a hen, which is just going to be the female. We use it across most birds. So that's our terminology. You can also see a little chart over here that you can correlate spur length and to some extent beard length to the bird's age. Spur length is going to be more indicative though of the true age, because the beard, once it does get, it grows about 4 to 5 inches per year. So eventually, if a bird does make it to 3+ years old, that beard's going to start rubbing on the ground, and those modified feathers will wear down. So anyway, nice little chart there. We can go on to the next slide here. And a real important thing with turkeys, well, I should say a real neat thing with turkeys is we've got a number of different subspecies across the continent. And I will, all across Illinois here, we've got the eastern wild turkey, which is definitely the most common, as you can see, across about the eastern third of the country there. Now with this map, I do want to point out that this is from the year 2000. So now we're talking about 2 decades ago. This map is filled in substantially since this was made. So turkeys have continued to expand. And a lot of this blue area on here, for example, in Illinois and Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, really all across Iowa as well. That's all filled in, as is a lot of these areas in the West. A lot more robust now, so turkeys have continued to sort of expand. Let's see. So you'll notice this calls the Florida turkey is also called the Osceola. So you'll see those two names sort of used synonymously. And you're going to hear, when it comes to turkey hunting, some interesting terminology that's going to make you think about baseball potentially. The Grand Slam, the Royal Slam, World Slam, Super Slam. These are all basically turkey hunting challenges that have been created by the National Wild Turkey Federation, which is a conservation group that's really dedicated to help, in the restoration of wild turkey and continuing to increase that habitat. But they've created these challenges that hunters can go for, and they're challenges that basically lead to adventure. So you start out hunting turkeys here in the East, eventually you find out turkey hunting's a lot of fun. You might want to expand. Maybe you go to Florida, hunt an Osceola turkey. Go out west and hunt a Merriam's. Now you've got 3. Go down to Texas and get that Rio Grande. And once you harvest those 4 most common species of turkey here in North America, that's called the Grand Slam. And that's recognized by the NWTF. If you add into that the Goulds, which is in northern Mexico, gets into Arizona, New Mexico a little bit there too. And then the ocellated turkey down in Mexico, you can go all the way up to a World Slam. And then the Super Slam is something where somebody harvests a turkey in all 49 states where you can turkey hunt. So that's including Hawaii. Only Alaska does not have a turkey season. So point is, if you really get into turkey hunting, there's a lot of cool things that you can go for, and a lot of challenges that'll push your limits and cause you to get out there and make some memories and some adventures. So a lot of fun. With this, we're going to get back into our Eastern turkey here with the next slide. We're going to talk about reintroductions first. So I alluded to this earlier, but one of the greatest conservation success stories in our country is the wild turkey. At one point, a lot of naturalists, hunters, conservationists thought that the wild turkey was going to go the way of the passenger pigeon. And around 1900, and like it says here, 1910, wild turkeys were gone from Illinois, which is hard to fathom in today's world, but that happened. Sort of a combination between unregulated take and then, of course, no season, so they could be hunted or killed year round. They could be poisoned by farmers. Basically, all that was free game. And then we also had habitat destruction. A lot of the forests, the mature forests that they relied on for mast producing, nuts to keep them through the winter, and then also roost sites, those were chopped down for farming and for other reasons. So anyway, beginning in 1900, we started to get into the regulated hunting era, and we started generating funds using both the Pittman-Robertson dollars and then hunting permits for other things. And we started to bring the habitat back. And once the habitat was there, we could begin reintroductions from states that had decent turkey populations. And around 1959, that started here. And in Illinois, we had areas where turkeys were doing real well. They would go in those areas, trap the birds, and move them to areas where they wanted turkeys to be established, and that worked very well. So initially, basically across the whole country, they tried some efforts where they would pin raise birds and release them. Those did not work because farm raised birds like that don't have the survival instincts needed. But trapping wild birds and moving them worked very well. So this not only happened in Illinois, but in a lot of states across the whole country. And obviously you can see here, big rebounds up into the 2000s and even continuing to expand now. So now we've got 49 states that have turkey seasons, which is awesome. I don't think turkeys are soon to be established in Alaska, but 49 out of 50 is pretty dang good. And now today, it's estimated that there's over 100,000 wild turkeys living in Illinois alone. That's pretty amazing considering back around 1900, there was potentially around 3,000 left in the whole country, which is pretty similar to like the numbers of like polar bears we estimate in the world today. So that's kind of a huge shift from an animal that was basically getting ready to be gone to something that today are even causing nuisance issues. So really great success story, and definitely one that that hunters can be very proud of because they played an integral part of it. So now we'll go ahead and get back into our eastern wild turkeys here. So some key behaviors and attributes. Breed during the spring, obviously. This is the spring turkey season is basically meant to align with this spring season. Most of our hunting seasons are during the fall. And of course, we do have a fall turkey season as well, but it's not as popular as the spring season with the breeding activity, the gobbling, and fanning out and all the stuff that turkeys are doing in the spring. That's a really exciting time to be in the woods. And that's the time that most people think of when they're thinking about turkey season. Now in the fall, like we're basically in the late winter getting towards the spring now, all their activities are going to be focused around food, just basically is keeping warm throughout the cold winter, stacking on the body weight so they can make it through that. They're generally going to be the most active during crepuscular periods, which is true of most of the critters that we're hunting here. But of course, turkeys are diurnal, so they are going to be active all day. But the best time to hunt them are going to be close to sun up and then sundown if the season allows it. Turkeys have very keen eyesight. They're birds, so you're not wearing blaze orange. They can see color, depth perception, very good, movement, really clue in on that. The hearing is pretty decent too, but your turkeys are not going to smell you. So they do actually have a sense of smell, we believe, but their olfactory lobes are not very well developed. Most of their brain is like most birds, most of their brain is used to interpret sight. So they lack in the scent, but they make up for it with sight. So you still got to be careful, but if you happen to be a little bit smelly, you'll probably be okay, unless your hunting buddy doesn't like that, but the turkey probably isn't going to smell you. So Now, what you go on to the next slide here. What you need to be able to do in the spring, though, is differentiate between your male and your female turkeys. The male turkeys are the ones that you're allowed to take. So how do you tell them apart? Well, luckily the sexes, even though they look pretty similar, there are some differences. Obviously, we know the beard we already talked about, which is actually modified feathers, not hairs, but it does look like hairs. But then we also got these colorful red, blue, and white colors, including a snood and wattles and caruncles and all these other cute names for wobbly bits on the head of the turkey there. These really stand out. And whether it's a mature gobbler, a big tom, long beard, like the picture here, or a Jake, that's going to be one of the first things that you notice, especially when the bird's excited, you're calling. Those colors are going to be really bright. You're going to see blues, reds, whites, really going to stand out. The body itself is going to be darker, just all the colors are going to be darker. The hen is in general just a little bit more muted. Remember that they're the ones that are going to be incubating the eggs, guarding the nest, so that cryptic coloration does help them out there, keeps them a little bit hidden, a little bit better. Vocalizations are different. Your hens are just going to be doing yelps and clucks and things of that nature that we're going to talk about later in this program. And your male turkeys are going to be doing the famous gobble and the drum, which is one of the lowest noises that happens out in the woods. Really, really cool things to hear. And these are the things that really get turkey hunters excited. So we'll be talking about some of these later on. The strutting. So if they puff out the feathers, push out that tail fan like this one here in the pictures, only the males do that. So that's another way to tell them apart. And then size, the males average, about a quarter to a third bigger than the females. So all these things can help us to tell them apart. Some of them are still tricky though. And here in this next slide, we're going to look at a picture of what a Jake and a hen look like. If we go here to the next slide. So here's a picture up here in the top right. These are Jakes. So you see that stubby little beard. It's pretty hard to see, but you can see this red that stands out on the head, and blue and white. And if they were excited because you were calling at them, those colors would even stand out a little bit more. Nice dark color when they're seen right next to a hen like this. You can kind of see how the hen's just a little bit more cryptic. The head is duller, much muted down colors to not draw attention to her. Of course, lack the beard, and the spurs are just little bumps. Occasionally a hen can develop a beard. That's another story, but anyway, look at this big group down here in the lower right. You'll see a bunch of gobblers puffed up, some hens in there. And the important thing to remember is spring turkey season, you're getting a one at a time turkey, and males only. So make sure you can identify what you're shooting at, and make sure that only one is in basically in your pattern. Because in either that group of Jakes up here in the top or that big group here in the bottom, I don't really see too many that you could pick out and take a safe shot at where you're pretty sure you're not going to potentially be hitting others. So keep that in mind. One at a time, ID the males, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. So from here we'll move on. All right, so the behavior not only changes between the males and females, but seasonally it changes as well. So in the fall and winter, they're going to flock up into big flocks, and the main priority is feeding. And in the fall and winter, the insects and a lot of the things that they were sustaining on in the summer have started to dry up. So they really start to switch to mast, acorns, to seeds, and then of course agriculture, waste grain, very important. And This is a great time for turkeys to get in big flocks, offers a little bit of safety in numbers, and they can sort of move around to these seasonally available food sources. Because they occur in different areas. There's, and this is true with a lot of animals, but home range shifts can change by several miles between the seasons, and especially this time of year, really big flocks. Those birds have come from a long ways around to form those big flocks. So and they'll be moving around looking for the waste grain and trying to key in on the best food sources available. But then as we start to get towards spring, and we'll move on to the next slide.
Hey, Curtis, I'm going to jump in really quick.
Yep.
I think it was just kind of a slip of the tongue, but earlier you mentioned that only males can be harvested, and we've gotten quite a few questions in the past few minutes that bearded hens can be in fact harvested, and that's something we'll cover a little bit more in regulations. I just kind of wanted to address it out front so we didn't receive any more questions about that. But
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have the Q&A up, but yeah, good point. Bearded hens can be harvested. I've never got one. I seen one time. But yeah, they do happen out there. So anyway, good to talk about that right here while it's fresh. But with that, we'll go ahead and move to the spring slide here. All right, so now big flocks in the winter. You'll start to notice, and this is going to be happening pretty soon. The males, the testosterone is going to start flying. They're going to start fighting pretty soon. So you'll see them puffed up out in the fields, and they'll be throwing feet, and just it's that time of year, and these big flocks will start to break up, and basically the hens all go back to their start going back and getting ready for nesting. So they all kind of distribute across the landscape, and now instead of being in a great big large flock and migrating around together to food sources, the food becomes basically ubiquitous, and there's insects everywhere, and seeds and berries and all kinds of good things to eat, and so the hens can spread back out, and the gobblers will be at each other's throats, but a lot of times they'll be together in small groups until they basically get henned up with a hen. But yeah, in the spring, it basically turns to being all about breeding. And of course, they're feeding this whole time too, but the food's a lot more plentiful and easier to find in this time, the time of plenty, than in the winter where we're at now. So yeah, all this stuff will be happening soon. We'll start to see them fighting, and then we'll know season's right on the doorstep. And with that, so let's talk about some of the habitat requirements. So trees are going to be used by turkeys. The first thing we think about is going to be nighttime roosting sites. So turkeys active during the day. At night, they like to fly up in a nice, tall, mature tree, and that's where they sleep. They also do use trees for cover. Remember, all throughout the summer, it gets pretty dang hot. So some nice shade, some protection from avian predators. The trees provide, and escape cover as well. A lot of different things like to eat turkeys, not just people, but they're on the menu for bobcats and coyotes and foxes and anything that can get them. And bobcats can even climb trees, so they're not even safe when they're roosting. And occasionally you might be walking through the woods and you just find a pile of feathers underneath a roost tree, and yeah, there's a few different things that can get them at that time, but definitely bobcats are good at that, picking them right off the trees. And then grasses are super important for the breeding season. This is where they're hunting. They're eating primarily seeds and insects, and the grasses is where they can find these. The grasses also do provide the escape cover for the chicks. And yep, if you have those two things, which most of Illinois does, then you've got turkeys. And looky there, most of Illinois got turkeys. So hopefully we've all got them right in our not too far away from our home, and be getting at them here in the spring. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan for regs.
Perfect. Thanks, Curtis. And I noticed a few people said my audio was really loud. So if you could just let me know, I tried to address that and make it sound a little bit better. So if you could just quickly type in the chat whether or not that has been situated, that would be great. But we're going to first start off with kind of a quick conversation about what regulations are important. And just a quick caveat, this is not the totality of hunting regulations that apply to turkey hunting season. And thank you for all the comments. It looks like the sound is a lot better. Excellent. But just a quick caveat, this is not all of the regulations that apply to turkey hunting. We're just going to try to highlight some of the more important ones and some of the ones that you need to really keep in mind. But if you're looking for an overall summary of all the regulations, they can be found in this Illinois Digest of hunting and trapping regulations. But today we're going to cover legal game, what licenses and permits are required, lottery application. So there's some various processes to obtaining the specific permits that you need. We'll also go over a little bit of the legal methods of take, the hunting seasons, post-harvest procedures, and then a few of the kind of really specific turkey regulations that we'll kind of call miscellaneous turkey regulations. But just a quick guideline, this book can be found online, and I actually really like to have kind of a digital version. It makes it really easy just to do a Control F and do a quick search, and you can find those keywords really nicely. I will say, though, that this specific document is not the actual wildlife code. And that's one thing I think a lot of people get incorrect. So if you're looking through this digest and something seems like it's worded vaguely or it just doesn't make sense, this specific document is basically somebody's summary of the wildlife code. And so if you actually want to read what the wildlife code says word for word, you can do that through the DNR's website. So if you happen to find a loophole that you think you can exploit or something like that, that's where you can find the full kind of legal written verbiage for a lot of these regulations. So first, we're going to start talking about legal game. So what is considered legal game during turkey season? And as Curtis mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have kind of two primary seasons of turkey hunting in Illinois. We have both the fall season as well as the spring season. And since the spring season is kind of imminent, coming in the next few months, that's what we're really going to focus a lot of our discussion on today, as well as in the 102 on Thursday. So during the spring, you can harvest a tom or a jake. So those are both males. Remember, the tom is the mature male, the jake is the immature male, but you can also legally harvest a hen with a visible beard. So what you're really looking for, when you're out spring turkey hunting, is the presence of that like Curtis mentioned, that hair-like protrusion from the chest. That in rare instances there are hens that will possess that trait, and it will kind of result in a visible beard. In that case, those can be legally harvested during the spring turkey season. A lot of hunters will kind of go ahead and still pass on those bearded hens because obviously the hens are the ones nesting and creating the population growth, and so that's kind of an ethical and personal decision that you can make either ahead of time or in the heat of the moment. But just remember, what you're really looking for to ensure that it's a legal bird during the spring turkey season is that presence of a beard. But like Curtis mentioned, the toms are pretty easy to identify between a tom and a hen, and those big distinctions that he talked about, both in coloration and in size, is really important to keep in mind when you're out there. So we'll quickly go over some of the required credentials. To hunt in Illinois, everybody who was born on or after January 1st of 1980 will need to have a hunter education safety course. There are several different course options. You can either do an instructor-led, which obviously have been kind of on hold during the COVID pandemic. I believe I saw in the past few weeks that they're restarting the planning process. So we may see those instructor-led courses come back in the coming weeks. But you also do have the option for online self-study and a field day course. So you can kind of do it both ways if you prefer to do the bulk of your learning online, but then still get some of the hands-on activities. Those are available as well. Obviously, pre and post-COVID. But if you're 18 years or older, you can also do online certification. You can take the entire hunter education safety course from the comfort of your own home, on your phone, on your computer, on your iPad, and get it done in a weekend. And the nice way it's structured is that it's got kind of natural breaking points. And so you don't have to block off, this whole, 10 to 12 hours to do it in one sitting. It does give you the option to kind of pause and come back and resume your activity. So that's a really great resource. If you plan on hunting with a shotgun, we'll get into some of the different legal methods of take a little bit later on, but your main two options are going to be archery or a shotgun. If you plan on hunting with a shotgun, any resident, it doesn't matter who owns the firearm, but any Illinois resident who has a firearm or ammunition in their possession must have a valid FOID card. FOID cards are not issued FOID cards are issued by the Illinois State Police, not by the DNR. So if you do have any questions about this process and you try to phone and contact the DNR, they are just going to eventually tell you to contact the state police. So just kind of save everybody a trip and contact the state police first. It is a 10-year expiration, and so you are required to renew it after those 10 years. And I've seen a few news articles in the past few weeks that there's a really big lag, several months through the FOID card process. So they have kind of extended if you're in the process of renewing and yours expired, but with that backlog, they're allowing that certification to keep current. So you'll not end just because of that backlog. But if you do need to either get your first FOID card, I would do it sooner rather than later, just to get it in the queue as quick as you can. And same with a renewal. If you have a renewal coming in the next few months, it may not be a bad time to go ahead and kind of get that paperwork ready and get it submitted so you can have that renewal. So there's a few different licenses and permits that are required as well. So you will need a base hunting license. There's several different types of base hunting licenses. There's a really nice chart in the digest that kind of describes, the different hunting licenses and who's eligible for what. But you will need a version of the base hunting license. You'll need a state habitat stamp, which is not an actual stamp. It's kind of an electronic. It used to be a physical stamp, but they have kind of shifted away from that in recent years. And so now it's just kind of all electronic. And you will also need a turkey permit. And so we'll go over that in a little bit later, and kind of how you can pick out a turkey permit and what specific permits are valid where. But these are kind of the main three credentials that you're going to need: a base hunting license, a state habitat stamp, and then a turkey permit. And also always sign your permits and licenses. They are not considered valid until you go ahead and sign them. So once you either print them off or go get them from a sporting goods store or Walmart, just go ahead and sign them right then and there so that you make sure that those permits are valid for you to use. So there's a few different types of turkey permits in Illinois. The best way to describe it is that there's kind of two main types. So there's a special hunt area permit, which these are permits for a specific site, but then there's also county level permits, and the county level permits are good for private land, non-Illinois DNR, so some areas like the National Forest, and some of these other bigger tracts of land that are not managed by Illinois DNR. And there's also a few sites, and this is where turkey hunting gets a little bit confusing, especially in the permit system. So there are some sites, some Illinois DNR sites, that require a special hunt area permit. So that is a permit that says you can only hunt this specific site. But then there are sites that also allow you to use the county level tag for those specific sites. And so if you didn't happen to get drawn in the lottery for one of these special hunt areas, it may kind of seem like your options are very limited. But what we'll talk about in the next few sections is how to kind of address that. But there are a few Illinois DNR sites that you still can hunt using a county level tag. And again, the county level tags are good for private land and other non-Illinois DNR land. So the Shawnee National Forest is a great example. So understanding which tag is right for you. So this is a portion of the digest that I think a lot of hunters just kind of look at it, and it seems like a ton of information, and they don't give it a whole lot of thought. But there's a lot of really crucial information in this one table, specifically about turkey hunting. And one of the biggest ones is if you look at the column, I know it's really hard to see, and I apologize, but the column that says Turkey Spring. So you'll see several different letters. There's either a C or an S. And what that tells you is at that specific Illinois DNR site, what type of turkey permit is valid at that site. So if it has an S next to an individual site like Apple River Canyon State Park, so that you will have to have that special hunt area permit for that specific site. If it has a C next to it, that means it's going to be at that county level. That county level permit will be valid to use at that specific site. Now, I will caution you, if you find some of these sites that oh yeah, here's a much better illustration. I forgot I made this slide, but so you can see that C and S kind of delineated there pretty easily. But what I will say is, like, let's say Anderson Lake State Fish and Wildlife Area here at the top. So you can hunt that site with a county level tag. Great. The issue is very often these sites are still very limited to how many hunters they allow on a specific site. So some of them might be 5 hunters per day, some might be 10. And a lot of that is going to come down to who basically signs in first. And so at a lot of these sites, they'll have a sign-in sheet, and whoever the first 5 people are that signed in get to hunt that specific site that day. Now, a little bit more about permit lotteries. And this is where it really pays to plan as much as you can in advance. Obviously, you can see here we've already passed the first lottery, which is for residents only, and we've also passed the second lottery. So currently we are in the third lottery, which means the number of permits remaining is obviously a lot less. And it's real challenging if you do not put in for that first lottery. A lot of these special hunt area permits are pretty much all allocated during that first lottery. There was a few sites left that maintained 1 or 2 tags or 1 or 2 permits during the second lottery, but those were all gobbled up pretty quick, no pun intended. So in future years, if you're really interested in turkey hunting, try to remember to put in for that first lottery. And one of the easiest ways I have kind of come to think of it in myself, and a nice reminder, is while you're deer hunting, it's time to put in for your turkey permit application. And while you're turkey hunting, it's time to put in for your deer firearm application. And so kind of whichever species you're hunting, just remember, the opposite is probably open for the lottery applications. And so try to get those in as quick as possible. Now, what's nice about the permit lotteries is you can apply as a group. So maybe there's 3 or 4 of you that all want to hunt together, and you kind of want it to be an all or nothing type situation. And so you can put in all as a group. If one person gets drawn, you are all going to get drawn. Now, it does not statistically increase or decrease your likelihood of getting a permit. But what it does, again, it allows you to ensure that if you do get a permit, you'll have somebody to hunt with as well, because you can kind of put in for a group. You're not guaranteed a permit, but will likely get one. And then again, we have that county permit versus site-specific permit. So this is where you'll need to do some pre-planning and some thought process about where you envision yourself hunting. And if you haven't done this process yet, but you still want to try to get out in the spring, there are, as you can see here in the bottom, there is an over-the-counter option. And so these are basically permits that are left over after all 3 lotteries, and they're kind of a first come first serve. So the first day that over the counter sales go up, there's typically a fairly decent line at the sporting goods stores or Walmart, wherever you want to buy your permits. So just kind of be up there as quick as you can and hope that you are able to get an over the counter permit. And now the over the counter permits, I will go ahead and say the majority of them left will all be for the county level permits. So in that case, you're going to focus on private land. You're going to focus on non-Illinois DNR, so perhaps the Shawnee National Forest and some of the other bigger chunks of forest, as well as some county park districts. There are county park districts that do allow regulated hunting at their specific park. I'm not sure all of them off the top of my head, but I do know there's a couple here in East Central Illinois that get hunted quite a bit. So you can also look into some of the county lands, whether it's the park district or the forest preserves. Those are another option as well. Now back to the kind of the site specific regulation. So this is kind of where, if you're hunting on public land, you are likely very familiar with this document and where these are housed. But if you're not, this is essentially the document for a specific site that's going to tell you everything that you can do at that site. It's going to tell you what species you can hunt, where you can hunt it, what you can hunt it with, when you can hunt it, and just kind of, it's going to have all of the information in one nice format that you can just quickly see, a quick overview of that site. And so this is a really great resource. And another great resource, the DNR built a new website the past, oh, I got, it was probably 3 or 4 months ago, I think, when they launched it right before deer season. But it's called Hunt Illinois, and it's got a lot of really nice tools that are kind of modern, tools that the hunters can use. And one of the big ones is they've kind of revamped the way they do hunter fact sheets. And so it sounds like that's going to be the long-term play, is to shift a lot of the hunting stuff away from DNR's website and kind of shift it and house it on this new Hunt Illinois website. But there's a lot of really good information. One of the biggest tools is the Hunt Planner. And so it essentially will pull up these hunter fact sheets and tell you exactly what you can do and where. But this is kind of the key to public land hunting in Illinois, are these hunter fact sheets. And you'll notice here at the bottom there are some check-in and check-out procedures that typically vary depending on the site. One thing I want to quickly remind people is the windshield card. And so if you're not familiar with the windshield card, not every site requires it. It seems like kind of in the east central part of Illinois is where windshield cards are required on most sites. But it's basically a free piece of paper you print out. You go into the system, you say, I'm going to hunt turkey spring, deer, whatever you want to hunt at that site. You print it out and you throw it in your windshield whenever you're out at that site hunting. And that just lets everybody know that you're out there hunting and that sort of thing. And then you are required to go back into the system after the hunting season and report your harvest, as well as how many days of field you spent. So this is just another quick way for DNR to get as much information, as much numbers as they can on participation as well as harvest, so they can make these informed decisions on regulations. And so the deadline, just as a quick reminder, is February 15th. For these windshield cards. So if you are out deer hunting at public sites this year, or small game or upland game, go ahead and just kind of quickly jot down a reminder to get your windshield card back into the system. Because if you do not go back into the system, you will lose hunting privileges on that specific site for the following year. And so it's really important to make sure you get those submitted. So the bag limit for turkeys is fairly simple. You can harvest one tom, jake, or bearded hen per permit, and you can obtain a maximum of 3 spring permits. Looks like we had a question from Jake. Do you have to report a harvest of 0 for any day you hunted public land? Yes. And so that's actually a really great point about windshield cards, is even if you print out a windshield card, but you didn't hunt that specific site that year, the system still says you printed a windshield card. And so you will need to go back into the system and report 0. So even if you didn't harvest anything, even if you didn't hunt that specific site, but you just happened to get a windshield card, go back into the system and put a Z. Now the Illinois turkey season is basically divided into 5 segments. And you'll hear people, some people will call them segments, some people will call them weeks, but it basically means the same thing. But more importantly is this kind of regional division of Illinois in terms of turkey season. And so as Curtis mentioned when we were discussing ecology, he mentioned that the spring season is basically aimed at kind of matching and meeting that peak breeding period. And so that kind of follows the exact same thing we're seeing here. And so obviously, the southern zone, they're going to experience breeding a little bit sooner, just because everything's going to be slightly warmer, just the way, southern things are. And so you'll see in the south zone, the season does start a little bit earlier than in the north zone. So just kind of keep that in mind, depending, your planning process and things like that. There are different season dates depending on where you are in the state. And we have a question from Greg. Why can you only hunt till 1 p.m.? Great question. So you can see here the shooting hours. So if you're your standard turkey or standard deer or small game hunter, you're used to seeing a half hour before sunrise to a half hour after sunset for most legal shooting light in terms of Illinois hunting. One of the main reasons is the theory is it allows birds to get back to the roost, and we'll cover this a little bit later, both today and on Thursday, of how critical good roosting locations are for these birds. Essentially, if these birds do not get on their roost before sunset, they do not have the ability to get back up there, and kind of vice versa. If they're on their roost and happen to get bumped out of that roost tree in the middle of the night, they will not be able to get back on that roost, and so they'll spend the night on the ground. Which opens up them to predation, as well as there's a lot of more moisture on the ground. It's a lot colder, and so there's just a lot of things. And so you'll see a lot of states close at either 12 or at 1, and that's the basic principle is to allow those birds to get safely back to the roost, but also allow them to feed a little bit or to feed in the evenings a little bit before they hit that roost. So again, there are a few states that will allow you to hunt that evening hunt. But in Illinois, it does close at 1 o'clock.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Is my sound better, first off?
A little bit.
A little bit? Okay. So one point I want to make is some sites, the 1 p.m., it's 12 o'clock, so make sure you're checking your site-specific regulations. And also, looking at the segments, now that we're looking at the seasons, I kind of wanted to make a point to bring this up with when you're applying for your lottery, to do a site-specific lottery, you have 10 options when you're applying for that. Do you want to talk about the strategy of how you pick the different segments, what's the better segment, and then how you change that between having like multiple sites to pick from as well?
Yep, that's a great question. And so my strategy when I'm applying for spring turkey permits, unfortunately, it didn't pay off this year because I didn't draw one. But typically, so you'll see a lot of people put in for that first segment. The first season is kind of the holy grail for a lot of people, just because the birds aren't pressured yet. They haven't heard people calling. There's been no one out there hunting them, and so a lot of people target kind of that first season. Myself personally, I prefer to target the kind of latter portion of the entire turkey season. So I really like the kind of 3rd to 5th week. One of the big challenges, if you happen to draw a first season permit, is if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, we actually had a fairly decent snowfall on the opening day of turkey season. And that's some of the things that you might run into getting a first season permit, is that, you're going to have birds that are, out there and active, but you also might still run into winter weather. And so there's a bunch of different strategies, but typically I skew towards the latter portion of the season, because a lot of that is you'll see toms will go off and breed, and they'll have their pair bonds, but towards the latter portion of the season, they're going to start trying to find any of those hens that are still receptive but haven't been bred yet. And so they're going to be roaming a little bit more. They might be a little bit more susceptible to calling and decoying. And so it really just kind of depends on your overall strategy, as well as kind of your availability. And again, one of the big challenges with this kind of lottery-based system is you're having to kind of make a lot of these estimations up front. And so you may not, have all the information available. You may put in for a 3rd season tag and then realize you're going to be gone traveling for that week or whatever. So just try to plan ahead as much as you can. We had another question from Greg. When and how do you know when and if you receive a tag? Great question. So if you received a first season tag, those have already been mailed out. And I think, or not first season, but a first lottery tag, I think the physical tags have already been mailed out. But there's also a system on Illinois DNR's website. And I'm not going to lie, when you're going into the system, it almost feels like you're kind of hacking the matrix, because it's this giant black screen with just green letters. But you can type in your customer number, as well as some of your birthday and your name, and it'll pop up and say whether or not you were awarded a permit. Yeah, so we've had a few people in the chat say they've got their they've received their tag already. Okay, so we'll kind of move into legal methods of take. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Adam. And actually, first, we have a question from CM Darrow. The number of turkeys harvested on public land is a small fraction of the number of deer. What do you attribute that to? Fewer hunters, fewer animals? I think it's kind of all of the above. So there's less turkey in the state than there are deer. Certainly, there's also less hunters who prefer. There's more deer hunters than turkey hunters. But also, the big thing is that the population just isn't at the same level that the deer is in the state. So that's kind of the big distinction that you're seeing there is just the number, the overall size of the population. But with that, I'll turn it over to Adam, and he'll discuss some of the legal methods of take.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, so to hunt turkeys in Illinois, you're able to use shotguns and archery equipment. So we're going to dive in a little bit into shotguns first and then cover a little bit of archery. So first, I'm just going to start off by explaining this picture in the top right. We're just going to discuss these types of shotguns pretty quickly. Your first two are your over-under and your side-by-side. So some of the pros and cons to this. By the way, these are pretty similar. The only difference between these is the barrel orientation. Of course, one is over-under and the other one is side-by-side. So some of the pros and cons of these. You can find these types of shotguns for decent price at like a pawn shop or a used gun shop, stuff like that. But a little bit higher, you see a lot of higher end companies make these in the new shotgun market. So again, a little bit pros and cons there. Another con to these is that you only do have two shots. You have two barrels and of course one shell in each barrel. Some have two triggers, some have one that you have to pull twice, so that's another kind of thing to pay attention to. But again, you only do have two shots in these style of shotguns, which, for someone who's newer, might be a nice way to control your shooting and really pay attention to, your first shot and making it count. But then again, you do have the downside if you do need to take a second or third. You might have to quickly reload with that. So next up is the pump action shotgun. This is probably my favorite style of shotgun just because it's so versatile and so durable. You can find these really cheap, used, as well as even new pump action shotguns are pretty decently priced. And you can even find ones with different kinds of barrels and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of options of these. And again, they are very versatile. The one thing you have to pay attention with these is newer people who are getting into shooting, you have to pay attention to actually load the next shell. So you have one shot in the chamber, and then you do have to pump the forearm to slide the action back, have the next shell slide up, and then slide the action back forward to actually load it into the chamber. So it is an extra step of movement there between shots that you really have to get comfortable with and practice a lot to get effective with these types of firearms. And the next one is the auto loader. These are really good for novice shooters and especially smaller framed shooters, people who might be a little bit timid of shooting shotguns because maybe they're afraid of the kick. The nice things with these is that it uses the gases from the shell you shoot to load the next shell in, and it has a heavy spring there. So it automatically loads the next shot, first of all, and second of all, it uses up a bunch of that power from the shell, quote unquote, to load the next one. So it does reduce the recoil quite a bit. So these are definitely nice. You can get these in all sorts of variations as well, 20 gauge, 12 gauge. You can find a bunch of used ones for a good price or buy new ones. They're all over the market. So the pump action and the auto loader are kind of your two standard shotguns when you're looking at turkey guns. So moving on to some shotgun regulations. So shotguns between 10 gauge and 20 gauge are legal to use for turkey hunting. 410 and 28 gauge are not legal for turkey hunting. For your shotgun to be legal, it must only be capable of holding 3 shells. So that would be 1 in the chamber and 2 in the magazine. If your shotgun can hold more than 3 shells, you must put a plug into the magazine tube. That is what this green plastic dowel rod looks like. That is what you call a plug. So again, if you buy a used gun, make sure you have it. If you buy a new gun, make sure you have it. Sometimes a new gun from the factory, you might have to put it in yourself, but it is, in the box that the gun comes in. So just make sure you have that, so you're always legal, and you never have any issues there. And then another quick note here, shot number 4 is the largest shot that may be used for turkey hunting, and we will get into that in the next couple slides. So if you have any questions or need just another video or some more information to reassure what kind of ammo you want to use, or any questions about shotgun ammunition, make sure to check out our YouTube page, where we have a video called Choosing the Proper Ammunition. So a quick 10-minute video that Dan goes over all sorts of stuff, all the numbers on the box, what they all mean, all the definitions. So make sure to check those out. We also have a bunch of other great informational videos on there, so feel free to watch all those. So moving on to choke tube basics and selection. So if you dive into turkey hunting, you're going to notice that full chokes and extra full chokes are widely used in turkey hunting. And a choke, to start off, is a device that you can screw into the tip of the muzzle, and basically it changes the spread of your shot. So if you look at this chart at the top right, a cylinder choke spreads your shot the quickest out of the barrel, and then so on to improved cylinder, modified, and then full, which would keep your shot the tightest out to 40 yards. And now, of course, there's all sorts of aftermarket turkey-specific chokes that go to extra full, and even beyond fuller than that keep your shot at a denser group out to further distances. So when you're turkey hunting, your gun, if you buy one from the factory, usually comes with about 3 chokes in the box. Would probably be an improved cylinder, modified, and full. So you already have a choke that could potentially work for turkey hunting. But again, if you dive deep into it and you start looking at a bunch of different accessories and reading about guns and what to use and what kind of ammunition and chokes to buy, you'll see that there's a wide variety of specific turkey chokes that are meant to keep your shot tighter at even further distances. So some post-harvest regulations. You must attach the leg tag securely to the leg of your bird right after you harvest it. The tag must remain attached until the turkey is at the legal residence of the hunter. You must register the turkey by 10 p.m. the day of the harvest, and the turkey may not be butchered until it has been registered. So a few steps right there after you harvest a bird. You can harvest these, you can report your harvest online pretty quickly and easy, or you can also call it in. It'll ask you to take a few measurements of the bird, so make sure to have a pen or pencil and a little bit of scratch paper to write those down. But other than that, it's super, super simple. So some more regulations. Blaze orange or pink is not required. It is recommended, though, to carry at least a hat or some sort of clothing article of blaze orange or pink while you're traveling. Of course, there are going to be other hunters in the woods while you're hunting, so it's always, always play it safe. Always carry something like a hat in your pocket or in your bag, so that when you're walking in and out of the woods, you can at least throw that on, just to make sure that everyone else can see you. So some more regulations. Electronic calls may not be used. You may not harvest wild turkeys by the use or aid of bait. And no calling that imitates a turkey that does not apply to locator calls. from March 15th through the day before the season opener, and in the North Zone, March 22nd through the day before the season opener. So again, if you guys are out scouting for turkeys prior to the season, just trying to get some locations down, you can use locator calls, but you are not able to use actual turkey calls to get a response from those birds. And you cannot legally shoot a wild turkey while it is in the tree before 7 a.m. So some shot placement tips here. So with a shotgun, you're going to want to aim at the head and neck. Several pellets in the vital area will mean a quick and ethical kill of the bird. If you aim at just the head, much of the pattern will shoot above your target. And of course, patterning ensures that you know how your shotgun, ammunition, and choke to perform. So we'll get into that, I believe, in the next slide. But kind of the thing I always tell beginner turkey hunters, easy to remember, two things. One, you don't want to shoot a turkey when it is strutting with a shotgun. It is super hard for them to, basically what's happening when you're shooting a turkey with a shotgun is you're just trying to break its neck. And if the neck is puffed up against the back of the body, it's super hard for that to happen if you shoot a turkey straight on while it's strutting. It's always, for a quick and effective kill, you want the turkey to look like it does on this target here on the right, with its head up, nice and clean, easy position. You can take your time there. And I always tell people to just aim right where the feathers meet the neck. That's always just when your adrenaline's going, that's just a quick way to remember where you want to aim. Again, you don't want to aim all the way at the top of the head, because a lot of that shot is going to miss the turkey and you have a potential of missing, especially if something weird happens, which that tends to happen in the woods. You know, a turkey might make a quick move or something like that and get away from you. So I always tell everyone to shoot right there where the feathers meet the neck right there. And that's always going to be a quick and effective kill. So moving on to patterning a shotgun. So it's best to pattern your shotgun before the season to find the effective range. Use the same shells, shot size you plan to use during the season, and choke, of course. Shoot at various distances, 10, 20, 30, 40 yards, to ensure your pattern is sufficient for an ethical harvest. And again, number 4 shot is the largest that may be used for turkeys. So if you look at the shot size chart right here, number 4 is the biggest. Kind of my preferred shot size is a number 5. I really like shooting, if anyone's looking for tips on what kind of shells to use, my go-tos are Winchester Longbeard XRs number 5s. Those tend to be just kind of an all-around great purpose turkey load. It shoots fairly well out of any sort of shotgun with almost every kind of choke. If you guys have any questions, make sure to let me know. I will be happy to go over that with you. But I spend a lot of time patterning my shotguns just to make sure I know how it's shooting and how the choke I have and the shells I use match and how well they work together. So when you're patterning a shotgun, you want your pattern to look like this top circle here on the right chart. You want a nice even spread of BBs. You can pattern using, I really like those turkey targets that were on the page or on the slides a couple back. If you want to go back to those, Jason, just so everyone can get a good look. One of those, super easy, set those up 20, 30, 40 yards. I sometimes even like to go further than that just to see what my shotgun is able to do. Of course, when things are moving quick, you don't have you can't range find a turkey every single time. And sometimes they're super hard to judge the distance on a bird, especially if you're running and gunning and you're not familiar with that exact spot you're set up with and you don't know the distances. Sometimes you take that longer shot without knowing it. So I do want to know, that my gun is going to perform well and I'm still going to ethically harvest the bird. So just play around with it. That's kind of my favorite part to do, honestly. I just like to test different shells and different chokes and kind of different distances. But just to be clear, 40 yards with a shotgun is an ethical kill. Anything beyond that, frankly, you might just be getting lucky. So, and, the closer the better. You want them at that nice distance between 20 and 40 yards for a good kill. Sometimes when they're too close, they could be hard to shoot too, because you're at that point, especially if you're using a turkey choke, your shot might be so tight at 10, 15 yards that any little movement to the left, right, or just above the head, it might just be a clean miss. So if that happens, with practice, you'll be quick on the gun to reload or get another shot in to take another effective shot. But those close shots can be tough. So just make sure to practice, tinker around. Let us know if you have any questions. So now on to some archery related regulations. So legal vertical bow types are recurved longbow or compound bows with a minimum pull of 30 pounds at some point within a 28-inch draw. Minimum arrow length for all vertical bow types is 20 inches. That does not include the point. To use a crossbow, it must have a minimum draw weight of 125 pounds, minimum overall length of 24 inches, a working safety, and used with fletched bolts or arrows of not less than 14 inches, again, not including the point. Broadheads must be used for archery turkey hunting. Broadheads may have fixed blade, but they must have metal, flint, chert, or obsidian napped or expandable blades that must be metal. Broadheads must have a minimum of 7/8 inch diameter when fully open, and all other bow and arrows, including electronic arrow tracking systems or that utilize radio telemetry, are illegal. So those are a few rules right there about archery hunting turkeys. One thing, or if we have any questions, we can go on to the next slide though. One thing I do want to say about archery hunting, if you are a deer hunter and you want to get into shooting turkeys with your bow, I would recommend to lower your poundage a good bit. Again, it doesn't take as much force to penetrate through a turkey as it does through a deer. I believe the minimum still is 40 pounds, but instead of shooting 60, 65, 70, whatever your deer archery setup is, you can lower that significantly down just to first of all, it's, you don't have to, you just don't have to worry about it being just as fast or have as much power to go through like it does a deer. It's a lot more comfortable, obviously, to shoot lower poundage, and you can hold your bow drawn back for in longer periods of time too, which can be very helpful when turkey hunting with a bow. So now moving on to some shot placement with archery equipment. So a turkey's appearance changes significantly at full strut and can make pinpointing their vitals a challenge. So of course, if you are a very good shot with a bow, the headshot is going to be very effective and very lethal. Although I would not recommend that for somebody who's trying turkey hunting with a bow for the first time, I would definitely just focus on getting that arrow right through the center of that bird. Unfortunately, you might have a little bit of meat damage, but of course not as much as shooting a shotgun at the turkey's front side or at the breast or at the side, of course. So focus on dialing that arrow right through the center of the bird, and here you have the kind of targets right there at every angle that you might see a turkey in the field. So from the back side, you're going to want to focus that arrow right at where all the tail fans meet right there. The one on the bottom left here, right through the side of the wing. And then, of course, the straight on one, you're going to want to put it either, if you have that capability, put it on the head. If not, you can put it right there, right above the beard and right below the neck. And with that, we're going to throw it over to Jason.
Thanks, Adam. So we're going to move through some land access here. We are running a little slow on time, so we're going to go through this. That way we can get to some fun stuff and talk about some strategies and decoys and things like that. So we have a couple of ways you can access some land. We already went over the different lotteries that you need to get to these different properties, but just some other ones. We got hunting preserves, so those are your outfitters. Then we have public land, and that's split up between the federal forest, state land, county land, and then we have the IRAP program. And the IRAP program is going to have, you're going to use a county tag for that. So if you have an IRAP program site that you want to apply for, that's going to be a county level application. Then you have private land, of course. So if you own your own land, you're good to go. So this is a highlight of the huntillinois.org site that Dan mentioned earlier when he was going through the hunter fact sheet. So this is part of the hunt planner. You can use this to help you find sites in your area. So you want to do this before the lottery application when it comes to turkey hunting. So you want to have a good idea of where you want to go. And for this, I put in anywhere in Illinois just to see what would come up. And here are all of the sites that have spring hunting seasons in them across Illinois. So we're going to talk about number 45 here, and that's the Green River State Wildlife Area. So again, this is going to be up northwest. There you go. So this is what the new hunter fact sheets kind of look like. So instead of having that table format that Dan had a screenshot of, this is kind of a drop-down menu. So this is going to be, you just hit turkey, site-specific regs, and then turkey, and it goes over the different specific turkey regulations that are at that site. So this again will give you the same information that the hunter fact sheets would give you. So it tells you right here, it says that the site requires a windshield card, for instance, and you can click on that to go and download the windshield card and things like that. So this is a much better site compared to the old IDNR site. They really did a great job trying to make this a one-stop shop for hunters to get in and look at it. If you're not familiar with it, it did come out this fall. They do have on the top part of the website, when you get there is a link. You can watch a 7-minute tutorial, and it goes over all the different tools that are on this website. And I highly recommend doing that so that way you understand how to use it and it's as efficient as possible for you. So these sites also have maps you can go to. So there's a hunt map link that you can click on, and it's a map of Illinois. It is a little glitchy when you're scrolling down to it, so be prepared for that, but it's better than what they had before. Before, some of the sites you may remember or have seen before that they almost look like an old campground map that someone may have even drawn or something like that, and it's hard to kind of judge your area on where the boundaries are. These are just a Google map layer, and it has the boundaries on it. You can see where the different parking lots are at in the blue squares there. And then when you go over here and you click spring firearm season, it tells you where you're allowed to hunt at. So it overlays your area where you're allowed to hunt turkey in the spring there. Another resource that you can use to help narrow down these sites, because since there are so many on that map, like which one's better than the next one, you can look at the public land hunting report. Pardon my cough. So looking at Green River, looks like they had 11 turkeys taken off of there between 2019 and 2020. So that's a decent amount compared to other ones that you can see on this list. And so this is the majority of the public sites are on this list. You can just Google Public Land Hunting Report Illinois, and that'll take you right to the link, and you can go through the different years and see the different reports from each year. The link is also provided on the bottom of the slide, so that way when you get this presentation, you can look this up again if you need to do it that way. And these are really nice because they tell you the site size and also the pressure of the site. So it tells you total hunt trips taken. And so this one had over 3,000 hunting trips taken. So it's a pretty pressured site for compared to some other ones that are here. So this helps you kind of narrow down, like when you're applying for these lotteries, you can get a good guess at which ones are going to have more applications applied to compared to the other ones. So if like Dan, who didn't get a lottery ticket this year, he's applying to some of the more popular sites in the central area. So you might use this to kind of do a risk assessment on which site might not have as many turkeys, but won't have as much pressure compared to these other ones that are more pressured. And then again, we also have this IRAP program. If you're not familiar with this, this is where landowners can work with the DNR and they can get a management plan and possibly even some funding to do a management project on their land. And in return for that, they are allowing access to their land for hunters. And there's over 19,000 acres since 2011, and I think there's even more now after this past year that they've been opening up for people to go use. So instead of the DNR buying land, they're using this program, which is a great way for them to acquire more acreage for people to go use. And this is another lottery that you have to win. And pardon me. Good news is that first-time hunters, so if you haven't hunted that species in the past 5 years, or a youth hunter, you're more likely to win this program. And they have this across all the different hunting seasons. So check this out if you're struggling trying to find a place to go. And again, there's private land. This can be difficult to get access to for especially deer and turkey season. You can maybe try to start with small game on the land, talking to a landowner and develop a relationship with them. We suggest being as professional as possible when talking to landowners and going and possibly knocking on doors. You can try to find who owns that land through plat information, plat map information. You can look this up at the town hall, or it might be available online depending on your area, and try to see who owns what parcel of land in your area. The new hunting apps that are out, like OnX Maps, for instance, they have that information on their app, and it's an overlay again of almost a Google satellite image, and they overlaid the landowners over that. So it's extremely helpful to see who owns what parcel of land. So if you're looking at going into public land, that is something to look into. You do need to pay for that app. So keep an eye out for that. So you try to find information that way. One hang up that landowners may have is the liability aspect of it. And so just so you know, if you don't exchange money, the way the law is set up, then the landowner is not liable for you. As soon as you exchange money, then the landowner becomes liable. So another thing that you can also use that the DNR has is to try to help you convince landowners to let you on the land is this little contract that they have that you can fill out. And again, this is available at the DNR website. It's a land access card, and you can print this out and have a copy. So that way you know that what you and the landowner agreed to. Something that we like to let people know if you're new to walking around the woods is the purple paint law in Illinois. You should always know where your boundaries are. And unfortunately, trespassing, ignorance isn't a good excuse for it. So make sure you know where you're at. If you're walking around the woods and you see a line of purple trees, that is the equivalent of a no trespassing sign. So if you're walking around either a private area that you're on, or if you're on a public land and you come across purple trees, that is a no trespassing sign. So make sure you're on the right side of those trees before you continue. And with that, we're going to start talking about some turkey vocalizations.
All right, Jason, turkey vocalizations. First, quickly, we had a question about different cutoff dates for hunter safety, hunter education. That just basically has to do with all of wildlife regulations are set state by state. So generally, that's going to be indicative of when the state first passed that regulation, and then the grandfather date will coincide with whatever date that passed. So anyway, on to turkey vocalizations. This is one of the really great things about turkey hunting. It gives you a chance to interact with the wildlife you're hunting, and this is I think this is what really makes most of us get really excited for spring turkey season. So we're going to talk about all these different vocalizations, and we'll go ahead and get right into the first one. Here is a gobble, and we'll go ahead and play it, and then I'll talk about it quickly. Oh man, makes the hair on the back of your neck just stand up right there. So this is obviously the sound of the male turkey. He's excited, he's gobbling. This is the most known turkey sound out of everything. So, this is one noise that you're probably not going to use when you're hunting. Now you can use a gobble to elicit a gobble from another bird to see where he is. But remember that making a gobble call could also call other hunters to your location. So not always the best idea. And generally the males are working for the females. So generally when we're calling, we're going to be making sounds of the females, and we're going to get into that here with the next one. So the yelp, we'll go ahead and play it. Now the yelp is your basically hen vocalization. So you're going to create most of the calling that you do is going to be different variations of this yelp. So you can do this with a lot of different turkey calls. You can make them a lot of different ways. You can make them sweet and sassy all the way to really angry and, trying to start a fight. So a lot of different things. Now, the next vocalization we're going to get into is like a yelp, but a little bit quicker. Let's listen to a cluck. Okay, so clucks, putts. Now we're basically talking about a vocalization that's a lot shorter than the yelp. So this is another call that can be used a lot of different ways, including we heard Adam talk earlier about not shooting the bird when it's in full strut. Pretty common for turkey hunters to let out a couple little clucks or putts to kind of simulate or to simulate a alarm putt, and that'll make the turkey raise up its head, giving you that shot that you're looking for. So let's move on to the next slide here. The kiki, let's listen to this guy. Okay, the kiki run. So generally used by immature, younger turkeys. This can also be an I'm lost call. So especially in the fall, if you were to break up a big flock and that flock was to slowly rejoin, they would use variations of kiki and kiki run type calls to sort of regroup. In the spring and summer, it can just be made by younger turkeys when they're feeding, and is more just kind of used as a confidence call rather than something to actually get the tom excited. Now, the next one we got here is going to be a purr. Let's listen to this one. Oh, that sounded pretty romantic to me. So yeah, the purr, again, another confidence type call. You can make it sound very sweet and romantic, really entice that tom to come on in. And really, this is a call that's made by content birds when they're out feeding, they're having a good time. So a real confidence builder, mixing in, makes your sound, dynamic and really sounds like live birds. And it's also a really quiet and easy call to do. So as the bird gets closer, it's one that you're not likely to mess up and sort of cause that bird to raise its alarms. Move on here. Cut. Let's listen to this one. So now we've got a cadence like the yelp, but we're staccato. So we're basically loud, fast, erratic single notes. These can be when turkeys are really getting into it and about to fight. And the toms will fight, but also hens can fight in disputes. And so you'll hear cuts and some loud, aggressive purring and those sort of things in fights. But just another variation, another vocalization that the turkeys make. Generally, most of your calls are going to be made out of combinations of the yelp / purr, and occasionally you're going to throw in little elements in there like the cuts, but you don't want to use anything like an alarm putt or anything that's going to make the bird become alert until you're ready to pull that trigger, because if you do cause the turkey to become alert, he's going to be real cued in on you. And if you don't get that shot off pretty quick, then it might be game over. So definitely one of the funnest things about turkey hunting is all these cool things that you can hear. Now, one sound that we didn't put in here, but you're going to hear a lot about is the spit in the drum. And this is one of the lowest sounds that occurs in all of in the natural world, and really cool. It's hard to explain. We'll talk about this more in 102, but it's a mystery. Science doesn't even know exactly how the turkeys make it or why. But basically, it's called drumming because it kind of sounds like if you were to hit a big empty 55-gallon drum, and just boom, a real low sound. And it kind of comes from, they think, the turkey inhaling a bunch of air while it is fanning out, and all of its feathers are puffed out. And then it's preceded by a spit. So you'll hear a and then hear that drum. And it's so low, you can really only hear it when you're real close to the bird. And when you get real close, you can not only hear it, but you can actually feel it, like when you're at a concert. So really cool noise that they make, and pretty cool that it's also still a mystery, even with all that we know about turkeys, how important they are, not just by hunting, but obviously domestic bird as well. So pretty cool. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan for scouting.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, so now we're going to dive into scouting. And I kind of mentioned earlier on in this webinar today that scouting is one of those things that it really doesn't matter if you're hunting deer, waterfowl, small game, upland game. If you're not in the area where the animals are, they're not going to be there, and it's really hard to bring them in. And so we're going to go over a few things, a few tactics, and a few things to look out for when you're out scouting. But the most important thing you can do is time your scouting correctly. As Curtis mentioned a few slides back when he was discussing kind of ecology and the winter flocking versus kind of their spring summer range, while it's very intriguing and enticing to go see a bunch of turkeys, in the fall and winter, and sometimes you may see flocks of 70 to 90 to even over 100 birds strong, a lot of that is not going to translate directly to the spring. There's been a lot of research that shows that, excuse me, after that fall flocking period and that winter flocking period, these birds will sometimes move, several miles into kind of their quote unquote spring home range. And so it's important to try and time your scouting so that you're not, wasting effort and going out finding a bunch of birds, and then come spring turkey season, they're gone. So a lot of scouting is going to be very, very seasonal. But the nice thing about turkeys is they give away their position a little bit, and we'll discuss that as we kind of move on. But one thing I like to do before I kind of make any scouting trip is try to get a good understanding of what the landscape looks like, and try to figure out where I think turkeys will already be kind of using some of these areas. And so there's a few things that I'm looking for. Ideally, you want to find large, mature trees. So this is where those birds are going to be roosting at night. So again, they're going to roost up in the tops of trees. And it's very often found in some of these riparian areas. And riparian simply just means kind of along water, for lack of a better term. And so you can see here in this map kind of right where that Windfill Prairie Nature Reserve kind of marking is with a little tree. So that you're kind of right along that river. You have this nice riparian area, but you also have this real nice bluff that's there. And so that allows birds to oftentimes get on the leeward side, so the downwind side, so that they're kind of blocked from those prevailing winds. And oftentimes those can be a really strong indicator of good roosting habitat. So you need to have good roosting habitat. You also need to have some kind of brush or prairie grasses or fields that are suitable for turkey nesting. And so obviously this is kind of the main breeding period during the spring turkey season. And so that nesting habitat has to be there. Otherwise those hens are not likely to be in an area. So you want to find areas that have good roosting locations, good brush/grass for nesting. But turkeys are also known as an edge species. And so you'll notice if you've kind of sat in some of our webinars previously, a lot of game species are considered edge species. An edge species, it basically means they spend a lot of time in kind of the intersection between two habitat types. And so for turkey, it's very commonly a mature forest, or a forest to prairie grasses, or a forest to mowed fields, or sometimes it's even an old logging road, or an old kind of clear cut through some timber. You might find a lot of turkeys utilizing that area too. They really prefer the kind of edge. So when you're scouting for sign, there's a few things to look for. Obviously, tracks and scat are really, really important. But I also like to try to time my scouting and to this concept of roosting. And so when turkeys get up on a roost, they will have several different roost sites they may use. They're not going to use the exact same spot every night. They certainly can, but ideally, it's best to pinpoint that roost right before your hunt. But going in and scouting ahead of time and just trying to get an understanding of what portions of the property they're utilizing, that's the kind of information that I'm looking for at this stage of the game. It's not necessarily that they're roosted in this specific oak tree on that specific ridge. It's just that they're kind of roosted in this area. After they fly down out of the roost, they're starting to do some displaying and some feeding in these fields. And so that's where looking for scat as well as tracks can be really advantageous, because it really gives you a good indication that birds are common and actively using a specific site. And another thing, if you're walking around the woods, keep an eye out for feathers. I know there's been lots of times where I've been walking through the woods and you just find feathers everywhere, and then you start looking a little bit more and a little bit more, and then instantly you look up and there's turkeys roosted above you. And so very often, when turkeys are not graceful flyers, they're kind of, I like to describe them as like a 747 trying to fly through the forest. They're loud, they run into everything, they lose a lot of feathers, and so that can tell you a lot about that specific area. If you're seeing a lot of feathers, chances are that's kind of an actively roosted site. So again, to identify potential roosting sites, you want to look for proximity to water, adjacent to open areas. So they really prefer to kind of fly down into these open areas. The males are going to be out there strutting and trying to show their stuff, and they want to be visible and all this stuff. So they want to be visible from a wide range so hens can kind of see them coming and see them from a ways off. And so it's really important to have that kind of adjacency to these open areas. Obviously, mature timber is going to have a lot of those roost type trees, a lot of mature growth, big trees that can hold a nice flock of turkey, or maybe even a gobbler or two. And then I kind of briefly mentioned this, the concept of shelter sites. And so if it's a particularly windy day, or even maybe it's still a little cold, spring hasn't fully come yet, I really, really, really like to focus on the leeward side of ridges. So those are going to be protected from the prevailing winds. So if you have a wind that's coming out of the west, on the east side of that slope is going to be a good, or the west side of that slope is going to be a good place. So when you're out trying to locate roosts, there's a few different ways you can do it. And one of the easiest, and kind of the overall goal of what we're trying to do, is establish a gobble response out of these birds. And so a lot of times we're just using loud noises. If you get out in the parking lot kind of close to dusk, if you slam your car door really loud and there's turkeys, within a kind of close proximity, that's going to be enough to cause those birds to shock gobble. And so it's basically just a gobble, an innate gobble response that they cannot really control. It's kind of like, if we're falling, we may just kind of gasp or kind of scream a little bit. It's kind of the same concept. And so we're trying to use locator calls to elicit this shock gobble response. And so you can do that either using an owl hoot. Some people use crow calls. Some people use peacock calls. Some people use other gobblers. So they do make gobbler calls that you kind of shake back and forth, and it kind of makes that same gurgling sound. That will also get that response out of the tom. But all we're trying to do at this point is locate those roosts, find where those birds are, and then try to figure out where they're spending the rest of the day. Now we're going to dive into a little bit more of the distinctions. And this is one thing that's really cool about turkey, is you can actually guess the sex of a turkey by just looking at their scat alone. So here's a quick illustration. Hen scat is going to be fairly cone shaped, where a tom or Jake scat is often going to be long and skinny and kind of J shaped. So you can kind of think of it just J for Jake. For the immature turkey, and that should kind of keep that straight. So that can really be advantageous if you're walking through an area and you're seeing lots of turkey scat. It can be a really quick indication of, are there hens in this area or is it toms? And so that can be really important. And kind of the reason for that is basically the anatomy of the birds. So you can kind of read it here down below, but the droppings exit the large intestine into the cloaca. And because the corridor is kind of large and stretchy, because again, it does have to stretch and conform to eggs as they are laying eggs, the dropping can curl and clump before finally exiting. Or males, they don't have that. And so it's going to be in this nice kind of J shaped, where the female is going to be in a nice cone shape. You can also identify the sex of a bird by looking at the breast feathers. And so as Curtis mentioned when we were kind of showing the comparison between a male and a female turkey, the males look a lot darker, where the females kind of look like this kind of drab, kind of brownish gray coloration. And a lot of that is due to the tips of the breast feathers. So here you can see in the left, we have a nice breast feather from a male. It's got this real nice kind of black, solid black tip, where the female kind of has this brown buffy tipped. And so if you're ever out there and you happen to stumble across feathers, again, that can be useful information for you in your kind of hunt planning process. So when I'm out trying to kind of locate birds, one of the first things I try to do is pay attention to the wind, because wind certainly can carry your kind of calling in a certain direction. And so having that wind kind of at your back and pushing that call into the direction you want is advantageous. But ideally, you want to try to start locator calling, 15 to 20 minutes before sunset. Sometimes that you may not get any responses till it's closer to actual sunset, or maybe even after the official sunset. But typically, when you're doing this, try as best as you can to not get close to those birds. I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, but if you happen to locate a roost and those birds are already up in that roost when you find them, and you happen to spook them or scare them off of that roost, they don't have the ability to get back up there. And so very often, that opens them up to predation, as well as some of the weather issues. And so we want to remain as far away from that roost as we can, by still, trying to figure out where it is. And also, if you're trying to locate these birds, you ideally want them to be in that exact same spot when you show up the next morning. And so staying a little bit far enough away that you can locate where those birds are, but that you can still, make a plan without spooking them is kind of the big thing. And if we go to the next slide, what I really want to highlight is when you're planning your route in the morning, this is where I find, typical turkey hunting, you're finding a roost, you're setting up on that roost, you're hoping those birds fly off the roost and come down into your decoy spread. But the thing you need to keep in consideration is how can you get into that spot without the birds seeing you from the roost? Because again, they're going to be in an elevated portion, an elevated view, and you want to make sure that you can kind of sneak and finagle your way around there so that they don't immediately see you from the roost. Because if that does happen, chances are when they leave the roost, they're just going to fly in the other direction. But if we're still talking about scouting, when you find an active roost and maybe you want to see where they go throughout the day, try to get on the opposite side of the field, kind of hunker down, camo yourself in, and just kind of watch and see what those birds do when they hit the ground. Because that's really what's key. Obviously, having, knowing where the birds are on the roost is important, but what's more important is where are they going after they leave the roost. And so that's the information that you want to glean by looking at tracks, looking at scat, looking for feathers, but also getting out there and just watching the birds and see what they do. And so this is kind of just a quick summary of all the things I just discussed. When you do plan to hunt really close or adjacent to a roost, you want to consider how can you get in there? Where do you anticipate the birds leaving the roost? And can you get in and set up decoys without alerting the roosted birds? And I will say, again, this is the kind of stuff we're going to cover a lot, particularly in 102. But when those birds are on the roost, I see a lot of people start calling as they're just kind of sitting there and just kind of waiting, and they're just calling and calling and calling as those birds are on the roost. I personally, I do not want to be the first quote unquote turkey that starts talking in the morning. And so very commonly, I'm not going to do much calling until I either hear those birds start talking on the roost, or I start hearing them or seeing them fly down off the roost. Because if you think those birds know where all the birds are roosted, and then if you're over here, 15 minutes before sunrise, they're all still in the roost and you just kind of start talking, it kind of plays a little weird. So I try to let the birds dictate when I'm going to start calling, and you'll hear toms start hitting it off, hitting the gobbles on the roost. And you'll hear it just kind of carry across the landscape, and then 2 or 3 of them will start, and then 3 or 4 of them will start, and then hopefully the one that you're hunting starts. When that one that you're hunting starts in that roost that you're hunting, that's when you can begin calling. But also pay special attention to movement corridors. So we kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, that turkeys are edge species, and so they really like to hang on an edge. They have quite a few natural predators, so they don't want to just, blanketly just walk across a field. If a field has some low-lying kind of areas, very commonly you might see turkeys kind of navigate through those areas as they kind of try to stay hunkered down and remain out of sight from any other kind of terrestrial predators. But very often they're going to kind of work along that edge and use some of these movement corridors to kind of guide their movement. But another way to hunt them, and this is kind of what we're really going to discuss in 102 when we get into the kind of midday hunting. If you don't have any success off that first roost, there's a lot of people that will just give up their turkey day by 9 o'clock. And the majority of turkeys that are harvested across the country are honestly killed from about 9:30 to about 11:30. So don't give up just because you didn't succeed at getting that bird that you roosted the night before. Because what's very common is that tom already has hens. That's kind of why he's roosted there. He's roosted in a particular location so that he can keep an eye on the hen roost. As the morning progresses, he's going to fly down. He's going to either try to breed some of them or kind of do his thing with those females. And at about 9:30, 10 o'clock is when they're going to start breaking up, and he's going to start cruising and looking for other females. And so that's why just don't give up if you just miss out on that roost hunt. There's still a lot of hunting to be had throughout the day. And as the day progresses, this is where your scouting is really going to pay off, because hopefully you have an idea of where they're feeding. And that's where you're going to kind of transition to as the day begins to progress, is move into some of these feeding areas and hope that you can find a flock of hens. That's kind of what I focus on in that midday, is trying to find a flock of hens that are feeding, and then trying to set up near those hens and try to use those hens as kind of your live calling or your live decoy, so to speak. But now we'll dive into some tactics and go over some quick decoy strategies. And then a lot of this we're going to put into play, like we mentioned in 102, where we're really going to go over some very specific scenarios that we've experienced and kind of how we hunted those scenarios, how we called, how we set up our decoys, in hopes that it kind of puts it all together. But now we're going to dive into decoy strategies, and there's kind of four or five main decoy strategies that you can kind of think of, depending how you want to break them up. But decoys are arguably one of the most important tools in your turkey hunter's arsenal. But I will say there's a lot of turkey hunters that have a lot of success without using any single decoys. So you don't have to use decoys, but they are an option. And so we're going to go over kind of what I call kind of the four main decoy strategies. So there's kind of a feeding setup, there's a walking harem, there's a fighting setup, and there's also a breeding setup. But it's really important to utilize these kind of strategies in conjunction with what the birds are actually doing. So if they're not actively breeding yet, maybe it's first season and it's still kind of cold, a breeding setup may not be as potent, just because that's not what's actually occurring on the landscape. So just kind of pay attention to what the turkeys are actually doing. But you also, obviously, depends on what decoys you have. Some people will bring out full taxidermy, and use those as decoys. I will go ahead and say you don't need that. You can get by with a $30 or $40 decoy. But what I will say is be careful about what specific decoy you choose. There's been a lot of research that shows that if you're out there using a mature tom decoy, that if there's jakes in the area, they're not as likely to come to that tom decoy just because they obviously don't feel like they're the mature bird in the area. And so they may feel that if they go over there, they may get their butt whooped. And so that may kind of change. If you're interested in just getting a turkey and a jake is you're more than happy with a jake, then you may not want to use a tom decoy because you may not bring in jakes with that specific decoy just because again they don't feel like they're the mature bird of that area. So I recommend if you do use male decoys to go on the jake side of things, just a little bit smaller of a decoy. It's going to have a smaller beard. That can oftentimes pay off. But feeding setup, this is pretty much how I start every single turkey hunt every year, is just with the bare bones feeding setup. It's the least intimidating decoy setup, so this is occurring all year, so it's nothing that's going to be kind of out of the ordinary. It's just a nice, safe starting point. So you're going to place a feeding, which just means kind of head down. And you can see, you can buy, multiple different positions and things, but I like to just try to find one that looks very similar to this, that you can kind of make look alert just by slightly tilting it back a little bit, or you can make it look like it's feeding just by tilting it forward. But you're going to place a turkey decoy or two. You can have multiple decoys in a food plot or an ag field or a forest opening, so maybe some of those logging roads like I mentioned earlier, or even a pasture. And this is, again, just to paint the picture that there's turkeys feeding in this area. Very commonly, a lot of people will kind of do a feeding setup like this and then place a jake decoy directly behind the hens. And so that, again, just kind of leads credence to the whole thing. And hopefully with this specific setup, what you're trying to elicit is kind of a territorial response from either another jake or a more mature male. And so he's going to see this jake hanging out with, two hens, and they're out there feeding. Well, he's going to want to come in and scare off that jake so that he can have the hens for himself. And so that's kind of the kind of response that you're looking for with a standard feeding setup. But again, it's very least intimidating. It's a great way to start out every hunt, just to kind of see how the birds are reacting and what they're doing. Another fairly common decoy strategy that is another one that you can use throughout the entirety of the season is kind of this walking harem. And so this is kind of just, you can kind of view it as the feeding. So you may have, 2 or 3 hens out there with a jake or a tom in pursuit. But with this specific setup, you're just going to make it look like they're either entering a feeding area or leaving a feeding area. So instead of them being, out there actively feeding, this just looks like they're kind of moving past it or moving to it. But you're kind of, again, trying to elicit the exact same response out of a tom or another jake, is that he's going to come in, say, these are my hens, this is my home range, and try to scare off that other male. Now, the fighting setup is arguably kind of the most fun, but I've personally only used it once, and it's never really worked out for me. But this is one that it can either go great or it can go wrong. So obviously this is going to be very, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. It's just a very aggressive decoy setup. Obviously you're trying to take the next step in your decoy setup that says, a tom came over here and is whooping the butt of another jake. And so what you're trying to do with this is use the spring hormones of a gobbler against himself. So ideally he sees this decoy, set up, and he just gets so fired up and so energized, and, oh, there's a fight going on over there. I got to go intercept and kind of intervene. It kind of goes along with, for all you deer hunters out there, when you rattle. Very commonly when you're rattling, you're trying to mimic 2 adult bucks fighting. Very commonly you're going to get little, spikes and little 4-pointers that might come in and stand off at a distance and kind of stare at them and watch. So it kind of goes along those lines, but what you're hoping for with this, a jake is probably not going to come into a setup like this just because, again, they're the immature bird. They'll kind of do what the young bucks do for a rattling setup. They may just kind of hang back and kind of look. Where with this, you're trying to hope an adult tom just sees it and books it towards you. And if you've never seen a turkey run, they are some of the fastest animals I think I've ever seen. And that's kind of what you're envisioning for this. Is the hope is that a tom sees it, he puts his head down and just books it straight to your setup. So it can be a very effective setup if you use it correctly. So this one is one I would really only use towards maybe the latter portion of my hunt. If I'm just not having success in maybe the first 2 or 3 days, then I might start to try some of these more aggressive setups like the fighting setup. Now, the most aggressive, and I think this is right behind feeding, this is probably one of the more commonly used decoy setups in terms of turkey hunting, is kind of the breeding setup. And so this is trying to elicit a very urgent response from turkeys. And so this is, basically a male is actively breeding a female, and the hope is that another male sees it and he's coming over right away to intercept as quick as possible, because that breeding is right now. And if he wants to breed that hen, he needs to push that other male away. So you'll kind of place a female on the ground with her head up, or her head could be down. It won't really matter too much. And then just kind of place a Jake or Tom decoy directly behind them, and kind of make it look like that hen is submissive and that they're actively breeding. Now, there's a few decoy considerations and some really important things I want to bring up. One of the big things is, over the past few years, with kind of the advent of social media, we've seen kind of a shift in the landscape of some of the turkey decoys that are out on the market. And one of the ones that has really taken storm the past few years is, it kind of looks like what you see in this picture, just kind of a half body of a tom. But you'll see people mounting them on the end of their shotgun and kind of using them as kind of a hide, and then they'll kind of stalk up to the turkey. I will say that is extremely dangerous, especially if you're on public land or you're hunting land with other people. So please don't mount the decoy to your gun. You don't need to do that, but just kind of a word of caution, those are available. But I do not recommend them being used, just because, again, you're putting something that other hunters are trying to find and shoot at right in front of your face, and it's not necessarily the best situation. But some other decoy considerations is, you do not need the most expensive decoy. The first turkey I ever killed, I actually harvested it over, I think they were like $5 or $10 blow up decoys that you could get from Walmart. And so sometimes those are enough. You don't always need the most expensive thing. But if you do want to go a little more high end, you'll see kind of this style of decoy right here has become very popular on the market. They're kind of half shell, so they still look like a full body, but they don't take as much room. And if you want to do a little bit of customization, what I very commonly do is, you can see how this tail is just kind of this artificial material that doesn't look very lifelike. It doesn't have kind of the natural filaments of a feather. It doesn't get kind of the wind wisping through it and just kind of have that texture. The texture just looks different. It's reflective. It just doesn't look right to me. And if it doesn't look right to human eyes, chances are it's not going to look right for turkey eyes, because their eyesight is incredible. And so what I have found to be really effective is removing this portion of the tail that comes with the decoy and replacing it with real turkey feathers. So over the years, if you're out there hunting or out there walking around and you find turkey tail feathers, just go ahead and keep them and start making a pile, until eventually you can kind of replace your decoy tail with one that, again, just looks a little bit more lifelike, because oftentimes that's all it takes. Turkeys often hang up past your decoys. That is a very common occurrence, and this is something we're going to have a whole section on in 102, is this concept of turkeys hanging off or hanging up past your decoys. And it's a real challenge. The big thing to keep in mind with turkey hunting is, when you put out your decoys, put them within 10 to 15 yards of you. A lot of people may put them out 30 to 35 yards. But it seems like more often than not, that tom is going to hang out, maybe 10 or 15 yards past your decoy. And he'll sit there and he'll strut back and forth, and he'll gobble and he'll strut back and forth and gobble and strut, sometimes for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. And so it's really important to keep those decoys at a close enough range that if that turkey does still hang up past your decoys,
that it's still within your effective range. And so I have found to have my decoys about 15 to 17 yards seems to be really, really good for me, because that way if they still hang up 15 or 20 yards, they're still on the right side of that 40-yard range. So just kind of keep that in mind. Keep those decoys in an area that if those toms hang up or jakes hang up, that they're still within range. Another thing to keep in mind is you want your decoys visible. Obviously, that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when I first started turkey hunting, I really didn't think about that concept. And oftentimes I would be in kind of a low-lying portion of the field without even noticing it. I'd put my decoys out, and any turkey that's just kind of walking along the ground has no chance of seeing them. So make sure your decoys are kind of in an area that can be seen. And remember that decoys, especially Tom and Jake decoys, may look like other birds to other hunters as well. It kind of comes back to what Curtis mentioned when we were talking about the gobble call. A lot of hunters don't use that out in the field just because, again, that's what every hunter is listening for. And so oftentimes it can bring you other hunters instead of other birds. And same can be said with decoys. So just make sure that when you're putting out decoys, you're not directly behind them or in front of them. And that should do it. But decoys are really fun, and it's one of those things that I kind of like to summarize that turkey hunting is more of an art than it is a science. There's some things that you can do one day that a tom will fly directly off the roost and land in your feet. If you try to replicate that 2 days later, nothing. And it's just one of those things that you just have to constantly keep trying, keep re-evolving, keep trying new vocalizations, keep trying new calls, keep moving around your decoys. And it's a very active style of hunting. So I saw we had a question about utilizing blinds. And blinds can be really good for concealing yourself and kind of concealing your movements. But one thing they're really bad at is being mobile. And turkey hunting is very mobile. A lot of the most successful turkey hunters are those who are going to go in with a backpack, hunt a spot for that roost morning, and then they're going to get on their walking boots and start trying to find more birds. So it's a very active style of hunting. I might be at a setup for an hour or two and then move. I might set up for 30 minutes and then move. But you're constantly moving, constantly reevaluating, constantly trying new setups and new vocalizations. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and he's going to take us home.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dan. So that concludes Turkey 101. So like Dan was hinting at, Turkey 102 is going to cover a lot more of this. We won't be going over the regulations as much, and we'll go right into some strategies and things like that, some of the more fun stuff. So please join us on Thursday at 7 to go over some of those other hunting tactics and scenarios that we're going to be putting together for everybody. And also reminders, we have our first virtual lunch that we're putting together for next Tuesday on February 3rd. And we'll be talking about some recipes that we like to use, showing you guys some photos or videos of us cooking some of those, and then also talking about other utilizations for different parts of the animals that we've gotten over the years, and talking about that. One thing pertaining to turkey hunting is Adam is going to make a wing bone call, and he'll show you how he does that. So you can actually take a turkey wing and make a turkey call out of it. So that's going to be one turkey aspect of that lunch. So again, join us. If you're not available at 12 p.m., you can register for it and get a recording of it emailed to you afterwards. So no excuses. And then our February schedule, we'll be putting that together next week when we meet up for work, and we'll get that out to y'all, and we'll have all of our webinars listed where you find them before, either on our social media. We'll come out with our schedule. Follow us on Facebook if you haven't done that yet. In that Facebook group, you'll get updates on all the different lotteries and reminders of putting in your windshield cards before February 15th and when to apply for your deer tags and everything else. So a lot of reminders through there, a lot of any DNR news that comes out. Please follow us on Facebook. Instagram, you get some more artsy photos that Adam's going to be putting up there. You can check that out, and some other ideas on there with recipes and things like that. And we are going to be building out our YouTube channel. We have several videos on there right now, including that ammunition video we talked about earlier, but we're going to be doing a couple how-to videos coming here in February and March this spring, and we'll be uploading a lot more videos to our YouTube channel. So follow that so that we are alerted to that when we get those up. before we get into questions, just a reminder that on our website, we do have e-learning modules. So if we're not doing a webinar in the near future on a topic that you're interested in, you can go and check out the e-learning module. And we have topics on waterfowl, deer, turkey, and upland hunting. So you can work your way through that. There's little quizzes in there to test your knowledge and see if you picked up information off of those. And just another resource for everybody to use. So with that, we appreciate everybody coming out. We had a really nice sized group tonight. We appreciate that very much. And we hope it was beneficial for you all. And if you have any questions, you can stick around and we'll try to work our way through them. It is already 9 o'clock, so we might be emailing some people some of the questions, but we can see what we can get through here in a couple minutes. So thank you all very much.
All right, well, I think we've gone through all the questions, so I think we'll go ahead and close it off again. Thanks for joining us tonight. And if you have any questions, reach out to us on Facebook or via email. We'd be happy to discuss that with you. And if it's something we don't know the answer to, we will certainly connect you with the people who do. So thanks and have a wonderful evening.